You're listening to the Thriveworks Webcast, where you hear facts, not fluff. Introducing your host, Dr. Anthony Centaur.
Hello, I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Centaur, and today we're going to be talking about addiction, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about being married to an addict. Now, with us today is Matt and Kim Matone. They are proprietors of Thriveworks Charlotte. Kim is a certified substance abuse prevention consultant, certified by the North Carolina Substance Abuse Practice Board. And Matt is a certified peer support specialist. And they've both spoken at a variety of different 12-step groups, treatment centers, sober living communities, and they've run family groups and a lot of different things like that for many years. And unlike some of our other people that we have on the show, Kim and Matt Matone don't just have clinical experience, they have personal experience. This is a very close to home topic to the two of them. So without further ado, Kim and Matt, welcome to the webcast.
Hi, thank you.
All right, let's just dive in. When I first heard that we're going to be doing this topic with this show, I started to wonder, I know a lot of addicts or people with substance abuse issues, they have the question, am I a user or am I an addict? And that's a difficult question that a lot of people ask themselves. As a spouse, how do you go about answering the question, is my spouse an addict or is my spouse just a user?
That's an interesting question, and I always knew. I knew we started dating in high school, and I knew when he was 18 years old that he was an alcoholic. So that tells you something about me as well. I just knew that, he kept drinking and he enjoyed it. And then it led to him he always had a beer in his hand. And if you look back at pictures, he always has a beer in his hand. So I didn't really have to figure that out. But I have heard some of my friends talk about the difference, how they were a little bit confused. But I think pretty much everyone knows.
Okay.
There's two litmus tests that I generally use, and one is, can they stop once they start? So, and what I mean is, after they have the first beer, can you stop yourself from having the second, third, etc. And the other one is it causing impacts in your life? There's a lot of heavy drinkers out there that on any given night can stop once they start, and if it begins to impact their life, whether it be professionally, personally, they're able to stop. The real alcoholic cannot stop in the face of consequences and on any given night.
Mm-hmm. Kim, you said, from the beginning, you said, this says something about me, because you knew from day one, yet that wasn't, it might have been a red light, but it was not a red flag. You move forward in the relationship knowing, on some level at least, that Matt was an addict at the time.
Right. I just have always been a caretaker and was taught to be a caretaker, and so I felt that's what I was doing, and I loved him with all my heart, and just felt like I didn't want to give him up, and I would do whatever possible, and it ended up being a very unhealthy situation for me for many years.
Yeah, so you were the helper, you were the nurturer, and that's interesting because, of course, you're a counselor in training now, and that is one of maybe the flaws of the counselor in training. Worked out well for the two of you, of course, but counselors, me a therapist myself, we tend to overhelp or look for people to help, and that's exactly what you ended up doing.
Right. So now I'm trying to put it into my professional life and not as much my personal life.
Right. Now, you mentioned beer and alcoholism, and was that the drug of choice for you, Matt, or were there other drugs involved?
Primarily alcohol. I certainly dabbled with other things.
Okay. All right. So you guys have been through recovery. You're definitely, you're long on the other side of this journey. But for those who may be watching or listening who are at the beginning of this journey, many addicts fail in recovery. I think the statistics, they're a little mushy, but it's between 40 and 60% relapse. When is it a wise decision for a spouse or a partner to say, look, I gave it my all, it's time to cut and run? What advice do you have to people kind of at the beginning, not knowing if their spouse is going to make it through recovery?
Well, first of all, I shy away from advice.
Okay. Smart plan there.
From my experience, we go back to the question again.
Yeah, absolutely. Since so many people in recovery relapse, at what point would you advise, or at what point is it smart to say to someone, look, this is too much. This is never going to get better, and I should move on. This isn't my fight.
Yeah, I think everyone has to come to that conclusion on their own. I look back at things. It was about 19 years for me to get to the point of saying something of serious. I mean, I said things over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Threats. I actually had houses set up for me to go to leave the relationship for years, and I guess it just you have to hit your bottom as well. And so that's what happened to me. But I definitely would encourage people to go, spouses, to go to 12-step programs and to go to counseling, and to really look at how it's affecting your family, and especially how it's affecting your children, and to put them, if you can't put yourself first, which I was unable to put your first. And that's when it came down to when we started to get serious help.
I see. Now, yeah, Matt had said, you're an addict when it impacts your life. And you said it was 19 years before you really put your foot down and said, we need to change something here. Was the impact, did it get larger? Did it have more of an effect as time went on? Or was it always equally disruptive?
It was up and down. It was very up and down. And I think that's why I stayed in the marriage for so long. And I'm still in the marriage. But, was because we had great times. Yeah. We had really wonderful times, and he was exciting, and we loved each other. And then it would go down, it would go up. But I would say it got towards right before he got sober. That's when it was at its worst, when I saw a lot of I just saw a lot of effects on the children, and a lot of me, and a lot of crying. that did it.
A lot of pain, a lot of crying.
Yeah, there was more pain than there was happiness at the end.
Now, you've been sober for a long time. Just to give some perspective for our listeners and watchers, how long has it been in recovery?
It's been 4 years now.
4 years. Is it still difficult to talk about the times when?
It's not so difficult to talk about with certain audiences. When I'm talking to a group, to a family, or to an individual, or to the relative of an individual, the ability to, or the opportunity to share my experience to help them is tremendously fulfilling, and it actually fulfills the 12th step that I'm required to do. So no, not necessarily. It is difficult to hear her talk about it. That's tough.
I see.
Pretty easy. But hearing my kids or my wife talk about those years, it brings back memories that are painful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start moving forward toward recovery. What is it like? What was it like for you? And what can someone listening in today, what can they expect when they begin a 12-step program or a recovery program of some type? And that's yours was 12-step, right? It wasn't detox. It wasn't in treatment. It was right into 12-step.
Well, I went into an IOP here in Charlotte.
And then just for our listeners, that's intensive outpatient, which is basically what, all day at the center and you go home to go to sleep?
This one was, it was 3 days a week, about 4 to 5 hours per day. It was a lot of professionals. I was in the banking industry at the time. So it was a lot of professionals who could get there after work, stay late, and then come on Saturdays. And that was a 16-week program.
I see.
Plus 12-step based. But they required me to attend 12-step meetings, get a sponsor. There was testing. You would walk in and your name was on the board. You headed to the testing unit.
Drug testing, or they just want to know if you were learning? They were testing your,
Yeah, they tested for all substances.
After 5 hours of IOP, you go home, you have a drink to relax, right? You gotta unwind.
No, and at the beginning, I'll tell you what happens. At the very beginning, you're there to avoid consequences. Or you're there to regain your stuff. It's okay. You're trying to avoid something bad happening. Maybe it's a job loss. Maybe it's the loss of access to your children, which is what it was for me. House. And I was purely there for selfish reasons. Absolutely admit that freely.
Okay.
But at the treatment center I went to, which was a great place called Dilworth here in Charlotte, those firm requirements at the beginning that I had to attend meetings and I had to take a urine test, forced me to comply. And once you begin participating, true those selfish intentions of regaining your stuff or stopping yourself from losing things switch into something else, and you truly want to get better for yourself. And I don't know if that took 3 weeks or 6 weeks, but somewhere in that 2 to 8 week range, my intention shifted from just regaining access to everything that was being taken away from me to, oh my God, I've got to get better.
So break that down a little bit. You see, you show up because you're trying to avoid your consequence. In yours, it wasn't really your job. It was your consequences at home. And what is it? What's the trigger that moved you from, oh, this is a real thing, a change I need to make for me?
It's really hard to answer when exactly that thing happened. I'll tell you my decision to go to treatment. I remember that very well. I was in a hotel room late at night, and I was sitting, and I had this moment. I can go and it was this transformational moment. I can go one of two directions. I can exit the relationship completely and live like the wild man that I am. I can put on, the fight of my life and get my family back. And it was a serious question I asked myself. I mean, now looking back at it, I can't imagine that I ever would have made any other decision. But that moment, I made the decision to go to treatment. Again, I was still in a pretty selfish place, but it was a life altering moment in that hotel that night. And then once I got in, I don't know what the trigger was. It, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. We talk about that. For me, it was probably slowly. I didn't have this overwhelming spiritual moment. Just one day I woke up and it was different. And now it's I lost my train of thought.
What is it like now? Back then it was, yeah. So today, is it second nature?
It is second nature today. It's part of our lives. The ability to participate in the North Carolina Peer Support Program, where I'm certified to work with alcoholics and their families who are in treatment. I don't treat them, but I can partner with counselors who are treating them. It's very rewarding. I'm very active in the local 12-step community, working with other men who are early in, or not necessarily that early in as well. It's tremendously rewarding. And it's something, again, in the 12-step, for those of you who are familiar with it, who are interested in it, the 12-step requires a recovered alcoholic to continue to share what's been freely given to them for the rest of their lives. So yeah, it's second nature to me. Every day I don't wake up wanting to work with another alcoholic, but I find that when I do, that day's a little bit better.
Such a difficult thing when you interact with someone now who's an addict. Do you think they're going to go to treatment and they're going to get better, or do you think it was so hard for me a lot of people aren't going to make it through. Like, how do you feel about the potential when you're working with an addict that they're actually going to recover?
The sad truth is most don't. And a lot of times you see that, and it's a harsh reality that we can't save everybody. Mm-hmm. They have to be saved, and frankly, sometimes they need a little more pain before they're going to get there. And unfortunately, not everybody does get there. It all has to do with their intentions. They're trying to do it just to get their stuff back or to avoid losing a job or whatever. That's a great way to get into treatment. That's not a way to sustain recovery. We just see it every day. If you go to a 12-step meeting over the course of 90 days, 75% of the room is different on day 9 than it was on day 1. And that's just the reality. It's a powerful, cunning, baffling disease.
Matt, you have an incredible ambition. I mean, you've been successful in multiple different types of careers. You run marathons, right? I know you're an intense marathoner. I'm sure that level of resolve, it takes a certain level of dedication and persistence to be able to do what you do in different aspects of your life. I mean, were those parts of your personality that helped you in recovery?
To a certain extent, but I think that was only at the beginning. That kind of resolve gets you into recovery. Mm-hmm. You truly have to have, in the 12-step world, we'll call it a spiritual experience, or a psychic change, a change in the way you think, in order to sustain it long term. If you try to do it just on sheer willpower and resolve, chances are you're going to fail. I certainly would. Mm-hmm. You need to truly turn your life into a different way of living. And I'm starting to sound a little bit spiritual, which is not a natural state for me. Uh-huh. But it's an important part of long-term recovery for most people. There's other people that go about it different ways. The most success that I've seen for myself personally and for those around me are to change their way of living through spiritual means.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, please.
You mentioned the marathons, and I think he started the marathons. Like I had run a couple, and then he came in and ran the second one with me, and it was before he was sober. He was still smoking and drinking. He ran a marathon.
Yeah,
he didn't do it well.
I had 8 beers and a half a pack of Camels the day of a marathon.
Yeah. But I saw him throwing himself into a healthy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was that same type of obsession and addiction, and he channeled it into something healthy, which was the marathon. And I see that a lot with addicts.
Yeah, a lot of intensity with addicts. Whatever they apply themselves to, it's with a great deal of intensity. Go ahead.
Yeah, it does tend to be an all or nothing personality.
Yeah. And that's good in some ways, and of course bad in others, as long as it's directed in the right area, I suppose. Kim, I have another question for you. Recovery is, as Matt sort of alluded to with the IOP, but even after that, even with the 12-step programs, I mean, it can be described as a full-time job. It can be described as a lifestyle change. Some people have said critically, but the 12-step programs are almost cult-like, and I'm not going to say they're cults, they're not, but in that you're so very involved. It's all-consuming. What is it like being a wife or a spouse to someone who's in those programs?
Well, I was pretty understanding at first, because I had been going to a 12-step program for 8 years before he became sober. So I kind of knew what to expect, and the women would tell me what to expect. But it was
So let me stop you for our watchers and listeners. Your 12-step program wasn't about your addiction. It was strictly about being married to an addict.
Yes, and it was about me and about why I was married to an addict and would continue these certain behaviors that went round and round, and actually joined another 12-step program later.
That's 24 steps, Kim. That's a lot of steps.
No, I don't do it all. I was not like it wasn't as intense. It didn't have to be as intense as Matt's needed to be, because his was almost a do or die situation. Mine was for overtime And I still don't. I don't believe I live or die my program. I never did. But I learned a lot and continue to. But with him, yeah, it was hard because it was at first it was
I was going to meetings every single day,
once a day, twice a day,
probably 10 to 12 meetings a week.
And here I did. I had this nice sober man, and he was nice now. He was sober, and I didn't have him before, like in the evening a lot, and now he was gone still.
Mm-hmm.
So that was tough. But we also did lots of counseling.
Yeah, we did a lot of counseling. I mean, one of the things though about the meetings that surprised me, I thought it was, the ego gets going a little bit. I thought out how heroic this thing that I was doing was because everybody told me what a hero I was. I would go to meetings. Oh, everybody would.
It's a Herculean thing to get sober, right?
Congratulations.
Oh yeah, at the meeting.
I'm not getting high anymore.
You're downplaying it, but it is a big deal, right?
It is a big deal.
I guess. But
at home, was it a big deal? Did you get that credit at home?
I'd have people telling me this. There were times when I was at meetings and she was suspicious of where I was. The muscle memory of me not coming home and doing something I shouldn't be doing applied to that. And there were times I was surprised. I was like, well, sweetie, I was at a meeting. And you could tell she was a little bit suspicious. And that took a while. It really did take a while for the family, I think, to accept that this was really happening, that this was going to be a sustainable thing. This was a permanent change.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was not overnight.
And what was interesting is when the whole, I guess the bottom dropped, it was not an ultimatum for him. It was not a you get counseling or I'm going to leave you. It was there was no thought in my mind that he would stop drinking because I tried it so many times. It was just a matter of, okay, you go ahead and live your life. And he happened to get help and then work his way back into my life. But I was checked out for a few months there, and it was actually very healthy for me to have finally hit that point. That's what did it.
And was it in part the 12-step programs that got you to that place?
Yes, It was part of that. It was part counseling, part time. Yeah, and it was just the extent of what was going on.
So for the spouses that are listening or watching, some might be watching this and thinking, how do I get my partner help? But you're talking a whole lot about there was a lot of work you had to do. Were you surprised at how much work you had to do in this process?
Yes, a lot.
A lot.
You want to, and you still want to blame the other person. I mean, it's hard not to do that, but you have to look at yourself as well and what your part is in it and changing yourself. And so I did a lot of things. Actually, the first marathon that I ran was huge for me because I signed up for it on my own. I was going to get there on my own, whether he said I could or not. I mission from him. And that was huge, to do something on my own and not continue this cycle that we had going on.
And that continued for Kim well into my sobriety. She, I remember laying in bed one night and she didn't ask. She made the proclamation, I'm going back to school to get my master's to become a counselor. There was no, do you think I should, or what do you think about? She simply made that pronouncement. She wouldn't have done that.
That was a shock to you that she would make such a plot declaration.
I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I was thrilled.
Yeah.
But 5 years ago, 10 years ago, she wouldn't have done that because we were living in chaos.
Now, you two got married. Let's set the background. You got married young, very young, right? So a lot of people today, they're getting married in their 30s, and they're like, of course I would just be independent. But you guys got married like you were high school sweethearts.
Yeah, we were children when we met.
You were babies, little babies.
We were 15 years old when we met.
You were legitimately 15 when you met. And married at what age?
22.
Oh, you know how we met in psychology class?
Is that right? It all comes full circle. Tell me about
That, real quick. So
Yeah.
that, because we were so young, we were even more dependent on one another. We had never lived, neither one of us had really lived alone, or I hadn't lived without a roommate or anything. And certainly not handle finances or anything on my own. So it was,
Yeah, our couples counselor once described it as this. She said, you're like siblings sometimes in the way that we communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Each other for so long.
And you guys said, ew, gross.
Right. And we still see that counselor actually.
Yeah.
She's been tremendously helpful.
Right. We got to wrap up here, but I have a few more questions. One is, you tell your story a lot now. Of course, you've told your story in many different settings. When should one begin telling their story? Who should they tell? Do you tell people when your spouse is in recovery? Who should know? Who shouldn't know? Question that often comes up.
From the perspective of the substance abuser, it's real sensitive at the beginning, and I primarily shared it with, of course, the professionals that I was working with, and then the folks that I was in treatment with, and the folks that I met in the 12-step rooms. A couple very close friends.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't move on to talking to family or that next level of friends until I had a good, few months under my belt. And prior to going into treatment, I didn't talk to anybody about it.
And were they surprised you were in treatment? Were they surprised that you actually had a problem? What was their response?
I don't think anybody was real surprised that I had a problem.
Okay.
I think I was the last one to find out.
Okay.
And my closest friends, the ones who I had lots of drinks with over the years, were also the most supportive people.
Is there?
Yeah, they were very supportive once they weren't surprised, and they were very supportive and continue to be today. Those 3 or 4 or 5 closest friends that I kind of grew up with.
Okay.
It was really, that was an interesting thing because, I had been going through my own recovery and my own problems. So of course my family knew about things, and it was no surprise when all of a sudden Matt didn't have a beer in his hand. We had to address this, or they would come to me to address this. And so that was hard, and I would feel bad because he would think I was breaking his anonymity, but there really was no anonymity there.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed to have support. My kids needed to have support. And because it's a family disease, it really is, and it was affecting all of us. But I did learn to, to respect his wishes more, and to make sure I was careful of who I discussed things with. I mean, another thing that was difficult with that was, here it was, like, I'm proud of him. He's not drinking. This is great. And I can't share it with anybody. So it had kind of this, well, I need some support too from people. I'm going through this. Also, I'm proud of it. So it was difficult.
It's a fine balance because for me, it's very difficult to look family on her side, perhaps, or neighbors or friends of hers in the eye at the beginning, knowing what she has shared with them. But part of my recovery, I've got to respect her needs to share and confide in those close to her. So it really was a very difficult balance. There was some serious resentments at the beginning, what she had shared and the people that she had shared it with. But I think on both ends, over time, she began to respect what she could share with what people, and I began to respect her needs to do so. And
it shows that you've come a real long way from not wanting anyone to know to now, talking about it on the internet.
Now we,
Never would have thought this.
Right?
Now we host support groups, we speak, we make videos. It's
Yeah, he didn't want anyone to know.
Cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, the jig is up. Kim, Matt, Matone, thank you both for being here. How can people get a hold of you?
You can Google us. Just search for Thriveworks Charlotte. We'll be the first you can email me at matt@thriveworks.com or kim@thriveworks.com. Or you can call us at 980-581-3061.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
And maybe I should have snuck it in at that. There was a point when I could have done it, but that as a couple, the whole point of our support group is as a couple, we get to share our experience to help others. I just like to make that statement.